If you're buying a new construction home, you need to look out because many home builders are setting up super strict requirements that make it hard to have an inspection done at all. Well, hello, I'm Wendy Pinnell, and a third-party home inspection is one of the best ways to protect yourself when you're buying a home. The idea here is to hire someone who is completely neutral, third party, unrelated to the seller, right? Because what you're after is objective information about the home's condition. The problem here? Well, more and more builders are making it next to impossible to have one done. This lines up with what we've said many times about builders. They have attorneys draft their contracts to protect their business interests. And I mean, that's their job. That's what they should do. But the problem comes into play when this puts you at a disadvantage. You know, with new builds, you have the option of having 4 total inspections, and you really need those inspections done to protect your interests, right? I mean, make sure that the home is being built correctly. Well, this whole issue of builders making it hard to get these inspections done first came to my attention at a home we closed in Fort Worth. Between the second and third inspection, our buyers changed who they were using. And when I asked them about it, they said it was because the first inspector would not physically inspect the roof. Well, that got my attention, right? So while we were there, I asked the newest inspector why that would be. Next thing you know, like, we're deep into this conversation about what builders are putting inspectors through. You know, and the whole time I'm talking to this guy, I'm thinking, this needs to be put into a video. All right, so what I want to do is explain the traps you're likely to run into when it comes to ordering a home inspection with new construction. I mean, you're gonna see these traps before, during, and after an inspection. And here's the thing, if you don't play your cards right, you may not be able to have an inspection done at all. So first off, let's talk about what happens before you have the inspection done, right? Because each step is important, and if you miss something way before your inspection is even scheduled, you may not be allowed to schedule it. So before the inspection, many builders are requiring that you provide a 30-day notice that you would like to use a third-party home inspector. Here is like a sample verbiage from the builder Megatel. This is what they say. Purchaser must notify builder's sales consultant no less than 30 days in advance of purchaser's intent to hire an independent inspector. Well, right off, that may not sound like too terribly burdensome, right? Except here's the thing. Sometimes they don't even know when the home is going to be ready for an inspection. So what if you don't get 30 days notice? And also, it's not just about you letting the builder know, it's also about the home inspector sometimes having to register and be approved 30 days in advance. And they have to provide like all this documentation 30 days prior to the scheduled appointment time. So picture, you know, the buyer finding out at the last minute that they're 30 days from closing and they try to hire an inspector. So that inspector would then have to submit everything required on the very same day, right? Probably not the most realistic expectation for your inspector. Plus, you have to remember that you'll be dealing with that same kind of timeline in the middle of being very busy packing and moving. So what does the builder require from the inspector? Well, many, if not all, will require the inspector to provide proof of insurance, okay? Well, that doesn't sound unreasonable, right? In order to become a licensed inspector in the first place, the Texas Real Estate Commission requires $100,000 in insurance. In fact, the TREC website reads, you must submit proof of professional liability insurance or any other insurance that provides coverage for violations of Texas Occupations Code, Chapter 1102, Subchapter G, $100,000 per occurrence. So it turns out requiring insurance is normal, okay? But let's talk about the amount. Now, we know that with pre-owned homes, the amount of insurance is really not even gonna come up, right? But what does it look like with new construction? Well, looking into it, we find out that this is one of the first areas that eliminates, just tons of home inspectors. Some of the new construction builders are requiring up to $1 million and even more in liability insurance. For example, the Perry home contract reads as follows. Any inspections performed by purchaser shall be performed by individuals and or companies that carry general liability insurance in an amount not less than $500,000 and provide seller with a certificate of insurance. So Perry Homes is going to require the inspector to have 5 times the amount required by Trek. Altura Homes are not much different. Their sales contract reads, buyer may hire an independent home inspector at its sole expense, provided that the inspector carries workers' compensation insurance and general liability insurance in an amount not less than $500,000. But they make it a little more difficult than Perry Homes. They require that the inspector provide builder with a certificate of insurance naming builder as an additional insured. So imagine you're a home inspector and you can do pre-owned home inspections all day long, but a buyer comes along requesting you do an inspection of their Altura home. The inspector finds out not only does he need 5 times the amount of insurance, but he also has to pull up his insurance information, call the provider, and ask to add Altura Homes as an additional insured. I mean, do you see how this is just a hassle? I mean, we're talking about one $500 inspection requiring an inspector to do that much. So essentially, builders are document pushing inspectors out of new construction. I mean, inspectors are just gonna decline. Okay, so that's Perry and Altura. How about MI Homes? Well, this is how MI Homes feels about third-party inspectors. Their contract reads, although MI believes that the hiring of a private home inspector is an unnecessary cost to purchaser, wow, well, at least they're upfront about it, but hang on, okay, they continue. MI does permit the use of an outside third-party private inspector provided that purchaser abides by the following. A, the private home inspector must be accredited by a nationally recognized home inspector organization. B, the private home inspector must carry a $1 million general liability insurance policy. So now we're looking at carrying 10 times the amount of insurance Trek requires, but that's not enough. The inspector also has to be a member of a nationally recognized organization. So just for fun, I looked up nationally recognized home inspector organizations, and guess what? They all require fees to join, and some require that you take additional classes. So just yet another hoop to jump through. Do you really think an inspector is going to do that for just one inspection? No, they're going to decline and move on to pre-owned homes. Megatel is similar to MI Homes. They say the home inspector must hold all appropriate licenses required by the state and provide a copy of the inspector's liability insurance coverage with a minimum coverage of $1 million to builder's sales consultant at least 30 days prior to the scheduled appointment time. Do you see how these requirements alone drive away inspectors? I mean, like, why should they increase their liability insurance by that much for just one customer? I mean, why should they join an organization and pay extra dues, or go through the process of naming the builder as an additional insured? So boom, they decline the inspection and the buyer has to call the next inspector and the next and so on. So, picture the buyer, right? When you're trying to pack and move, having to go through inspector after inspector. And don't forget, a lot of times the builder doesn't even give you much notice as to when the house is even ready for an inspection. So as a buyer, you don't have much time to sort through tons of inspectors, and hopefully find one who will actually jump through the builder's hoops for you. So what's the real likelihood here? Yeah, most buyers will just give up and skip the inspection. Okay, so that's before the inspection takes place, just the scheduling process, and your home builder has already winnowed out hundreds of inspectors who are, just gonna say no thanks. But how about actually during the inspection? Well, here's the list of common requirements I've found in many builders' policies and contracts, okay? The inspector must wear a hard hat and follow all of builders' safety procedures, and better yet, a builder inspector may follow the inspector everywhere during the entire inspection. Megatel puts it this way: builder may, in builder's sole and absolute discretion, elect to have its representatives accompany the home inspector while the inspector is on builder's property. But they're not done yet, okay? They continue. All of builder's safety procedures, including the wearing of a hard hat, must be adhered to at all times. Now, Altura Homes requires that inspectors perform such inspections in the presence of an authorized representative of builder. But what about our situation with our buyers out in Fort Worth? Well, many builders are making it extremely difficult for an inspector to be able to physically examine things like the roof, electrical panel, or water heater panel. All right, so much for doing a thorough inspection, right? Megatel's policy looks like this. They say inspectors are not permitted on roofs without executing a waiver of liability and indemnity acceptable to builder in builder's sole and absolute discretion. Well, I want you to think about this, okay? Anytime an inspector agrees to perform an inspection, he inherits the risk of missing something, right? He is exposing himself to liability. I mean, he has to face the fact that many builders will limit what he can view and what he can touch, but he still has to accept liability for doing his job right. Yeah, so let me get this straight. He has to adhere to all safety standards, including a hard hat. He has to get followed around by the builder's representative. He has to not go to certain areas, and yet he still has to assume full liability for creating a complete report. I mean, that sounds like a lot of legal risk for the inspector, and again, just a lot of hassle. Okay, so how about after the inspection is done? Well, after the physical inspection is where it gets really fun. If the inspector notes any deficiencies, okay, for some of these builders, he has to look up the matching building codes. Megatel states if the inspector determines any deficiency in the construction of the home, the inspector must cite the accurate and specific code with coordinating code numbers from the International Residential Building Code or the municipality in which the property is located. Altura Homes also chimes in. They require that an inspector provide the results of any inspection to builder in writing within 48 hours of home inspection, detailing any alleged violation of any applicable building code with citation of the relevant sections of such code. So for Altura, not only does the inspector have to do all this extra paperwork, okay, but he also has a timeline. Okay, it's like being back in school and having to turn your homework in on time. Megatel and Altura aren't alone with this, okay? Perry Homes also checks in. They want inspectors to provide the results of any inspection to seller in writing, detailing any alleged violations of any applicable building codes or standards with citations to the relevant provisions. So a home inspector charges on average $500 for a home inspection. I mean, it's gonna vary depending on the size of the home, but that's a good estimate. So for $500, he can do a home inspection at a pre-owned home, type up the report, and be done with it. With new construction, he has to look up all the relevant building codes and add those to the report, never mind all of the extra expenses we talked about earlier that they still have to cover. So I hope you're seeing what's going on here. Okay, there are just so many more layers of hassle and liability that third-party inspectors are just like, they're like, no thanks. So they're just gradually getting winnowed out. And let's just be clear on one thing. Home inspectors are not welcome at the new home orientation. Okay, so let's just say the inspector says the repair is absolutely relevant, okay? You as a home buyer have to have that conversation on your own without the benefit of the inspector, where the builder, probably has a different viewpoint of whether a repair is necessary or not. I mean, after all, if they thought it was necessary, right, they would have done it in the first place. This is how Megatel puts it. Independent home inspectors are not permitted to attend purchasers' new home orientation walkthrough. Any unresolved items specifically identified by an independent home inspector on the written report will be addressed directly with purchaser during the walkthrough. Now, I have to tell you, Perry Homes takes it one step further. In their contract, they state only purchaser and seller's representative may attend the new home demonstration. So according to their contract, not only can the inspector not attend, but the realtor isn't allowed to be there either. I will say that we've pushed the envelope on this one with our Perry home sales, and they've always allowed us to come to the final walkthroughs. I mean, it just takes a little persistence, and we're pretty good at that. Speaking of which, okay, if persistence sounds like a good thing to you, right, like really speaking your language here, you'll definitely want to check out our Let's Find Home questionnaire that you can find in the description section. Okay, so by now you might be wondering, what do inspectors think about all these rules and restrictions? Okay, well, I can assure you they are not quiet on the matter. Adams Home Inspection wrote an article where they describe how many home buyers are duped by home builders' tactics. In the article, Adams Home Inspection comments that D.R. Horton and Civich Homes hires what they call a third-party independent home inspector. These home builders convince many home buyers to not employ their own home inspector to inspect the home during construction or for their final inspection prior to closing. All right, now listen up, because this next part is serious, okay? They continue. These tactics are in violation of the Texas Real Estate Commission rules. The builder will adamantly tell the buyer there's no need to have the home inspected. We will hire a third-party independent home inspector for you. These home inspections are being set up by the builders and often paid for by the builder. These tactics have no indication that would lead you to believe these companies are an independent home inspection company. The article continues saying these types of home inspections are conducted on a simple one-page form and come nowhere close to complying with current state guidelines. Adams Home Inspection shares some of his own experiences about builders wanting to use their own inspection companies. He says, I have personally witnessed these inspection companies conducting these farce inspections to state they can't go up in the attic. It's not allowed. One inspector stated in a D.R. Horton neighborhood that he could not go outside on the side of the home because it had rained. He continues saying, some of these inspectors have also told clients that they cannot go up on the roof. Okay, it is not allowed. So what kind of inspection are they doing? No doubt one that will discover almost no defects and help the builder sell his home with the highest rate of return. So lots of good insight from Adams Home Inspection. So if you've gotten lost along the way, here's the whole situation for you. For the same amount of money, inspectors have to be micromanaged, increase their insurance, and do all this extra paperwork. So it's no wonder why so many third-party inspectors just say no thanks. And then you have the builders stepping in, inviting you to use their inspectors. So really, if you're going into new construction, be it a new build or an inventory home, you need to be familiar with the builder's restrictions and you need to find an inspector early on, okay? And expect to be turned down. With all of these restrictions, fewer and fewer inspectors are willing to go through the extra hoops that these builders are requiring. And I should say this, okay? Now more than ever, your final 11-month inspection is super important. Okay, because essentially that's when you hire an inspector for everything they may find wrong after you've lived in the home for almost a year. Okay, at that point, the home is yours and the builder can't control where you let the inspector go. And I mentioned this in the beginning, there are actually 4 total inspections you should have, with that 11-month one being the final. And if that whole concept is foreign to you, no worries, okay? I go into it a lot about it in this video, which you may want to watch next. In the meantime, Wendy out.